So, a couple of quick questions before we get started. How many in the room work with AWS, know AWS? Hands up. Okay. Back-end infrastructure, hands up if you do it, know it, work with it. Just trying to get a little bit of an idea of how and where I go with this. Okay, cool. So, my presentation is an intro to AWS, leveraging the power of the cloud and React Native. No, not really. I was told I wasn't allowed to do that. And that I'd probably be booed off stage. So we're going to do native iOS development. Who am I? In fact, almost none of you in the room will know who I am because this is my first time here. So, hi everyone. My name is Matthew Merriel. I'm an AWS infrastructure consultant for Cloud Solutions or Redify or Telstra or BTSD or, cool, whatever, doesn't really matter. Cloud with a T seems to be a pretty common one at the moment. I'm an AWS APN ambassador, which basically means I go around telling people how wonderful AWS is and how not wonderful the other cloud providers are. See? Spend most of my time doing serverless work, so serverless apps, serverless functions, serverless backend databases, all of those sorts of things. And to prove that I'm not infallible, I once stated that I don't see the value in containers and that I think they're just a passing fad. Yeah, I was wrong. Yeah, they look like they're going to be here for a while. I'm also trying this thing, this Twitter, that I hear a lot of people talk about. So if you want to, I don't post a lot, but whatever. And I'm also launching a blog, hopefully this weekend, buildinthe.cloud, if anyone's interested. Don't go there now, there's nothing there. So, why am I here? Because after all, I am not an iOS developer, I'm not a Swift developer. I do have a Mac. I don't know if that sort of, that's sort of a bar of entry or something. One of the big things that I find when I talk to a lot of my customers is everyone's got their center of skill, their center of excellence, and unless you're a geeky, techie person, you probably haven't played too much in the AWS landscape beyond the traditional EC2, virtual machines, S3 for storage, maybe RDS for a little bit of database. And when I start talking to you about advanced things like GraphQL, and you've heard of it, but when I start talking about AppSync, your eyes glaze over and you go, what the hell are you talking about? Well, they're the same thing. It's just, that's AWS's terminology for it. When I start talking to you around permissions and IAM, you turn around and you go, what the hell is that? I think I've vaguely heard of that in GCP. Is it the same thing? So, AWS came up with a little bit of an idea a while ago that they'd launched this thing called AWS Amplify to sort of make it easy for everyone who's not a full-time cloud architect or cloud engineer to do things properly and do things easily. So we'll start off with a little bit of a walkthrough. What is AWS Amplify? Why is it useful? Actually, one question I didn't ask. Everybody does know what AWS is, right? Yep, cool. Yeah, it's like Azure, but better. It's the right type of cloud. I used to say it's the right cloud because it's got fewer letters, but then GCP kind of broke that one on me, and oh well. So we'll have a look through AWS Amplify, why it's useful. We'll then have a little bit of a quick look at how to get started with Amplify and how to implement it into an iOS application. Please forgive me, my code is probably not super excellent when it comes to Swift. I did have a look at that Stanford iTunes U course many years ago and went, yeah, this looks interesting. I might, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll get back to this one day. And I think that was, I don't know when that launched, 2015 or 2014 or something. I'll get to it one day. So, AWS Amplify. AWS Amplify, as I mentioned, it's an open source product released by AWS last year. Yeah, I almost went there. It's got two main components. One is an open source framework to allow you to automatically generate and integrate with key AWS services. So things like authentication, APIs, so whether or not you want a REST API or you want a GraphQL endpoint, things like notification, so you push and you pull notifications, storage for things like S3, VR, because everything has to have a VR or an AR component nowadays or it's not cool. Things like pub/sub notifications, locations, tracking, app site integration, all of these sorts of bits and pieces. The other half of AWS Amplify is what they refer to as Amplify Deploy, or the AWS console, or Amplify console, or the just AWS Amplify when you're reading their official documentation. So it gets a little... Amazon Strong Point is not their documentation, just a heads up on that one. That part is trying to allow you to go, I've built my application, I've built my base cloud components, I now want to do that whole CI/CD toolchain thing that everybody keeps on ragging on about. Click, 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 next, finish. In theory, I now have a fully automated CI/CD pipeline. We're going to ignore that bit for tonight, because the last time I did a demonstration on that, it went horribly, horribly bad on me on this stage, so we'll just ignore that one. Why? So we've got our AWS Amplify tool, and I'll walk through in a minute on how we get started with it and what's involved in it and all those sorts of things. But why do we care? Why should we worry about these sorts of things when we can just make it somebody else's problem to worry about the back-end infrastructure and we can just focus on the application? Much like I don't want to have to worry about the application, I'm happy to do the back-end stuff. Somebody else can do the front end. Basically, the key bit for me, and the key reason why I think this is now my 5th or 6th presentation on Amplify this year, is it makes life very, very simple and easy to get started. So somebody looking at this, or having a look at the workshops or the guides that I've written or AWS have written, can get started, go, okay, let's set up my laptop with AWS Amplify. I want to build an application. I want to add multi-user authentication. I want to add a GraphQL endpoint. Here's my GraphQL schema. And hit deploy. Your entire cloud goes away, deploys, builds, has all of the best practice security configured for it. You're now ready to go. You've got a globally scalable, best practice designed, secured environment with the APIs and the SDKs to allow you to consume it in your application, be that JavaScript, iOS, Android, React Native, if you want to go down that path. Pretty much straight out of the box. Now, the CLI will guide you through any questions you don't know. So when you're configuring your authentication, you might ask questions like, well, okay, what fields do I want to capture as a part of my authentication? Do I want to capture their first name, their last name? Do I want a username, or do I want to use their email address as a username? Do I want their date of birth? Which keys do I want to use as the single identifier? I don't know, I'm not an authentication expert. Default config, please. Easy. It'll always default back to the most common scenario, which means I can deploy something I've never done before, like augmented reality or virtual reality, and go, right, well, that was simple. I now have 80% of what I need, and now I've got the code that I can work backwards from. It does everything in what's called CloudFormation templates, which is AWS speak for infrastructure as code, which means if one day you get a professional back-end guy that comes along and you can turn, and they go, Amplify, that's for proof of concepts and getting started. You can go, great, well here's everything's a CloudFormation template. You can now take that along and implement it into your production workflow. Fantastic. Conversely, if they turn around and go, well, I want to deploy this component that isn't a part of the AWS, the Amplify framework, for argument's sake, let's say we want to start deploying, what would be a good one? Time series data, machine learning algorithms. That's probably not in the framework. We can then go and pull our own CloudFormation template in, integrate it with our application and continue going. So again, we still get all the benefits of the automated CI/CD tooling, the tool chain through our CLI and all of those sorts of things without having to worry about not getting access to the wider AWS cloud, and trust me, there's a lot of it there. So how do we actually get started? The quick and simple easy answer is it's our good friend Node, because apparently everything in AWS world is nowadays. So literally, to get started with Amplify, the first thing we need to do is install it on our machine. That's pretty simple. Sudo, npm install. Let's globally install it so that we can query it from anywhere. AWS Amplify /CLI. Bang, done. We now have all the tools installed on our machine in order to get started. However, it's not actually going to talk to anything. It's the cloud. It's the public cloud. So we're going to need credentials. We're going to need, what region are we going to want to deploy things into, all those sorts of things. So we need to run an Amplify configure. That's going to ask us for things like, what's our secret key? What's our access key to our AWS environment? Do you have an account, or do you need to get set up with one? All of those sorts of questions to get you started. And again, it'll walk you through step by step for anything you don't have. Don't have an account? Easy. Go here, do this, follow these instructions, get an account. Then click on this link and create the access key and the secret key that you don't have, and then copy and paste them into this terminal. And that's it. We're now officially ready to start using the Amplify CLI. So from there, if we have a look at, what do we got? If I come out of that one, and then into that one, everybody should be able to see it. Yeah, man. Every time I connect to this TV, it doesn't like me. There we go. People read that? Yep, good, happy. Okay, so at the moment I'm in my project folder. I've just gone and done the, open Xcode, create new project, call it dummy auth project, nice and simple, and then I've just exited out of Xcode. Nice, simple. All we need to do is come along and say, I want to make this an Amplify project. So we come along and we say, Amplify init, and it's going to come back and say that this is already initialized because we can see that there's an Amplify folder in the thing, but we go Amplify and we go, do we want to use an existing environment? No. So what it's going to ask us is, what do we want to call our environment? Because we want to have multiple environments. We might want to have a cloud environment for our dev. We might want to have a cloud environment for a feature release. We might want to have our production environment. So we'll go ahead and we'll create a dev environment. Do I want to use an existing AWS profile? Yes, I've got lots because I'm an AWS guy. And that's literally it. It's gone, realized it's an iOS project, pulled in all of the relevant naming conventions, and now it's actually going to go into the cloud and create us a dev environment. Now, at the moment, it's not actually going to have much in it because all it's doing is just creating the bare bones. These are the things I'm going to need to be able to add functionality. But that'll take a minute or two. And so that's creating some buckets to store the configuration that we're going to build. It's creating a couple of accounts that are going to control the deployment process, and all of these other things that as somebody who's running through the Amplify process, I don't actually care about. I personally find it interesting, but everybody else who I teach how to run this, yeah, they don't. We now have our cloud environment. Let's say we want to add authentication. Authentication is usually a pretty good thing to have in applications. So I'm not going to run it because it's already in this program and it's going to confuse it. But if I wanted to add Cognito, which is AWS's globally scalable identity platform, which is actually worth looking into if you've never played with it. The first 50,000 users are free, so it's a pretty cheap platform. I think it's then starts at, what is it, 0.04 cents per user per month, no, active user per month or something very cheap. But we can simply just go Amplify, add auth. It'll then go through and ask us, what do we want to collect from the user? In this example, I've gone use defaults, which means it'll ask for the user's It'll ask for a user's username, their email address, and a password. That's pretty simple. Sorry, and their first and last name. We then would need to do an Amplify push, because we've told it that it wants we want a authentication platform, but it's actually going to need to go and create it in the cloud. So it's now going to go ahead and create all of those resources in the cloud and push them up, and everybody's all nice and happy. That's going to go and create the dev environment. We already have a production environment, so that's all nice and easy. The next thing we would need to do, because what it's gone and done is created all of these CloudFormation templates and has reference to which Cognito pool we're going to use and which S3 bucket we're going to host our assets in, and all of these sorts of things. We're going to need to pull in a record of that. So if we simply come in here and say add, where is it? Okay, it's grayed out because it's already added, but the AWS configuration.json file contains all of that information and is constantly kept up to date by, so here we go, AWS. Anybody know how to do that in, there we go. Bam, okay. You know what, Macs aren't half bad. So at the moment, that's actually going to repopulate that because it's still doing the dev in the background. So this file is going to keep track of the different environments. But this is where it goes and stores all of those unique pieces of information. What that then means is we can start leveraging it. Almost. Before we do, we need to pull in, if I go, most people here know pod files, and yes, cool, awesome. I'm sort of delving into new ground myself here, so I'm not sure how much of this I'm supposed to know. Awesome. Sweet, works for me. We've gone and added 3 pods here. We've added the user pool sign-in, the AWS user pool sign-in, which basically allows us to leverage and integrate with AWS Cognito. We pull in the AWS Auth UI because I've never really done an iOS project before, so I don't know how to build UIs. So we're just going to use the stock standard one that comes with Cognito. We're going to use the AWS mobile client, which is actually the mobile SDK that Amplify provides in order to integrate with all of the components from Amplify. So that's everything from the push notifications through to the storage, API and graph access and all those sorts of things. So once we've added that, we can then simply come into our app delegate, and all we've done is added in our function here to loop into the mobile client. We've then added our UI return in the did finish loading with options, and obviously we've just imported the mobile client. In our view controller, we've just added some, what I'm told from people who know better than I, is relatively simple code, which was presented out before I zoomed in, but never mind. So that's going to link in with the AWS sign-in manager, do the checked is logged in, and we'll basically loop in the auth UI that we're leveraging from Cognito if we're not. That's all the code we've added. So once we've done that, we can simply run our application and just by adding those 25 lines of code, we theoretically have an application. Now this has got create account logic, it's got forgot my password logic. So what we can actually go, we can go ahead and go, let's go dummy user 99, and we go password test user as. And I'm not going to make the mistake I made last time and actually type in my phone number because, okay, password complexity. Yeah, not going to type, fine. There we go. So what that's actually now going to go and do is that's going to send a confirmation email to my phone. Nothing like live demos. Bum, 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 bum. Hey, there we go. So that is confirmation code 311394. Hey, registration was complete. So now that'll automatically log me into my wonderful, beautiful application that does a lot of things. See? How fantastic is that? So you can see that I'm a wonderful developer. Bring a lot of, I think I've got a relatively unique viewpoint on UI design, rather minimalistic, if I do say so myself. Hey, that's the end. No, that's not right. So we've gone through, and apparently that's lost my last slide, but that's okay. So that's a relatively quick, relatively easy, relatively small, low risk, because as I say, my last one went bad. Look at how easy and how quick it is to get started with AWS Amplify and linking that in. Where you go from here is you now have a user that's logged in with a user state into the application that can be passed into an AWS environment and used to access other services. So what we could do is we could build an AWS AppSync environment, for example, which is nothing more than a GraphQL endpoint, and we could say, okay, we can now pass the user's cloud identity in and have AWS take care of all of the silly, annoying things like permissions and security hierarchy and view access and all of those sorts of things. So we don't have to worry about any of that. AWS Amplify is automatically going to turn around and go, the schema says he's only allowed to see his own records, therefore the AWS environment will only give him that back. And it'll take care of all of the security in the back end, and we don't have to worry about anything. All we do is say, here's a schema, go and do it. Here's a user identity, give me back the data. We can loop in storage, S3 buckets, things like that. Again, same rules apply. We can link in pretty much any AWS service and leverage all of the identity and access management controls that we gain by using AWS as our identity endpoint. What this means is that we can focus on building the front end and the user experience without having to really worry about all that back end stuff. But because it's all just being generated as CloudFormation templates, so if we have a look at scratch. There's my code. Nothing quite like when you see your code. Dummy auth amplify. So for example, that is the actual source code, the actual CloudFormation template that AWS Amplify generated in order to build us our authentication backend. So if we wanted to move away from this, from Amplify at a later date, you could literally just pick up this code and redeploy it in a different account, a different environment, directly using CloudFormation, and you'd get exactly the same result, the exact same result. All you would then need to do is come into your, where are we? Come into your configuration. See, it's populated now because it finished doing its deploy. Come in here and just give it the new pool ID, redeploy your application, and the whole thing's reconfigured. So, happy to stick around for a little bit longer. Obviously, never having presented here before, wasn't quite sure how detailed or how deep people wanted me to go. Happy to come back again, present on anything, you know, AWS. I'll happily even learn iOS development so that I can present. Got another set of people wanting me to learn Android development at the same time, but let's not worry about that right now. So yeah, we'll hang around for a while, answer any questions, and yeah, hope you enjoyed it.